Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to Political Gossip with Friends. Alberta voted. Now what? I think we have finished tallying the votes. Maybe, maybe not. We'll get into it. Thanks all for taking time out of your morning to join us here today. I'm going to start with a land acknowledgement, and then we'll get into nonprofits vote, and we'll get into our panel. So to start, in the spirit of reconciliation, we honor and acknowledge the traditional Treaty 7 territory and the oral practices of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Siksika, Kainai, Piikani, the Tsuut'ina, the Iyarhi Nakota Nations, and the Métis Nation of Alberta, of which I am a member and whose footsteps have marked these lands for centuries. The purpose of our panel today is to debrief Monday's municipal elections across Alberta. What happened, what does it mean, and what's next? I'd like to start next by introducing Nonprofits Vote. That's who this event is brought to you by. Nonprofits Vote. I am a member of the council, and I am going to bring on Alexa Briggs, who works with the Nonprofit Chamber, to tell us about Nonprofits Vote, what it is, why it's important, and why you should join. Welcome, Alexa. Show us your sweatshirt. People have questions about the merch. Big Vote Energy.
Big
Alexa,
vote energy.
what is Nonprofits Vote?
So nonprofits vote is it really just has one simple goal, and that is to put nonprofits on the political agenda. We have purpose built it for the nonprofit sector in Alberta. It's a space to find resources on election engagement and policy advocacy. It's a space to connect with your peers who are also dabbling in policy advocacy and political engagement. And it's a space to gain access to political insights and news that's curated and tailored specifically for nonprofits. You can also access more events like this one. We will keep doing our Political Gossip with Friends panels. And so it's really a space to get unapologetically political while remaining rigorously nonpartisan. The Nonprofit Chamber serves as a backbone organization, and we're guided by a nonprofit Vote Council with folks such as yourself, Annalise, Youth Social, Edmonton Chamber of Voluntary Organizations, Volunteer Alberta, Volunteer Lethbridge, the Rural Development Network, Imagine Canada, and the Calgary Foundation, as well as Mike Solberg with New West Public Affairs. And so we have a great group of people guiding the work at that table, and would love to have more folks join us on the website. I think there'll be a link in the chat that people can access to be able to join in.
Perfect. One more quick one, Alexa. Why is this an important initiative for nonprofits across the province?
Yeah, so I mean, we know that nonprofits can be reluctant to join in on politics sometimes. Politics can be fraught, and it can be really difficult to know where the line is for staying nonpartisan and making sure that you're on the right side of that. And so we're really here to help facilitate that and to help folks get access to those resources that will help them engage while also staying on the right side of the rules, and also making sure that nonprofits feel really empowered to contribute, to make those contributions at the political level that are so valuable, because we often have access to information that political decision makers don't necessarily have. And so it's really important that nonprofits have their voices heard and that those perspectives are included at those tables.
Awesome. Thank you, Alexa, and everyone watching. If you haven't already, head to the Nonprofits Vote website and sign up. Now we will move on to our esteemed panel here to dish all the gossip and help us try to make sense of the municipal elections earlier this week. I would like to welcome Jason Markusoff, who is a political journalist and analyst covering Alberta politics, policy, and public life for more than 2 decades. A regular commentator on CBC's Power and Politics, he previously reported for Maclean's, the Calgary Herald, where we actually worked together, and the Edmonton Journal. So Jason, you can turn on your camera. We also have Matt Solberg, a partner at New West Public Affairs. He brings over a decade of experience in Alberta politics, advising leaders, premiers, and political parties. We have Rachel Swendseid, a community leader and Okotoks Town Councillor who did not seek re-election in 2025. She co-founded a local nonprofit supporting families in need and continues to champion inclusive, sustainable community development. And last but not least, we have Jack Lucas, a political science professor at the University of Calgary, specializing in Canadian local and urban politics. He has published extensively on how citizens and political elites understand and engage with local democracy. I can't see any of our panelists, so I might just give our behind the scenes tech people a second to make sure we can see them all before we start picking their brains. We got one. There we go. It's not just me. We've got one. There we go. There's Jason in the newsroom. Hello, Matt. Got one more. And there we go. We all are on your screens, hopefully.
To give
Yeah.
people a little, hi everybody, to give people a little behind the scenes thing. Normally when you see a backdrop like this on TV on a camera, it's actually a blue screen, a green screen, not real. This is real. I can go knock the person right now. Actually, I think I see the head of Annalise's husband right there. Yes, I do.
I see people that I know in that newsroom. Guys, we're gonna jump into it. We have so much to talk about, and we're gonna start with political parties. They certainly, actually, before we do that, I did forget one thing. If anyone watching has questions for our panelists, you can put them in the chat. The chat is working, I can tell. So put them in the chat and they will come to me. We'll get to questions in about 35 minutes. So we'll start with political parties. They certainly made the races in Edmonton and Calgary different this year. The province introduced political parties as a pilot in these two major cities. When all the votes were finally counted, I believe 6 members of Calgary's new city council belonged to 3 different political parties, including 2 incumbents. So 4 communities first, 1 ABC, 1 Calgary party. And in Edmonton, Matt, correct me if I'm wrong, because I think this has changed since I wrote my notes. I think we have landed at 3 members of the new council belong to a Better Edmonton party.
That's
Yeah.
correct.
Seeing nods. Neither of the big cities' mayors belong to a political party, and many candidates ran as proud independents. So, Matt, let's start with you. What impact do you think these new political parties had on the races in Calgary and Edmonton?
Well, look, I think that the hype of political party impact didn't match the outcome. I think that when you're looking at the mayoral outcomes in both Calgary and Edmonton, we do have independents that have won, and in Edmonton, Andrew Knack won on a fiercely independent campaign, outright rejecting the idea of political parties being involved in municipal politics. But if you scratch a little bit deeper, you'll see that, there was an impact. They maybe didn't win as many seats or the big chair that these parties were hoping to. But a candidate like Sonia Sharp in Calgary, for example, I'm not so sure that she performs as well as she did, which is, she came within a few hundred votes of winning the mayoral seat. If it wasn't for the backing of a party and the sort of the apparatus within it. So impact was there, wasn't enough to turn those the mayoral seats, but in the open seats here in Edmonton, where there was no incumbent, in at least a few occasions, the Better Edmonton Party won, and including in Andrew Knack's former ward. So. I think there was certainly an impact. The one thing, though, I would point out is that the political parties in this go round were very much legal entities that were sort of taped together with duct tape to conform to the legislation. They weren't parties in the sense of having developed a grassroots base of support members, or even a well thought through policy development process. And I think that that's where the opportunity exists going forward for political parties on the municipal scene. And I think that you're likely to see some activity between elections on this in ways that Albertans just aren't used to.
Yeah, that's a good point because when we think of parties, we think of established brands that we've known for a long time, right? Where do you think the province goes next with these? And do they do them again in Calgary and Edmonton? Do they expand them elsewhere? Was this like a one-time experiment? What are your sort of predictions there?
Well, I saw this morning, I think probably came out of your newsroom there, Jason, but a CBC report with Minister Williams where he confirmed that the party system will prevail in Calgary and Edmonton, but that he has no intention of expanding it beyond the two major cities at this point. I'll be honest, I think that's the right decision. I think that there is an opportunity for voters to benefit from political parties. If they are given a chance to, like I said, grow between elections, establish some brands, and really the point of these are to, to create some identifying marks that the candidates can put beside their names, so that the electorate will have sort of a reflexive understanding of what this candidate, stands for. And I think that's, likely to the benefit of voters. They may still choose, like they have done for the most part in these two cities, to reject candidates affiliated with parties. But that's a choice voters can make. And like I said, I think we're going to see political party action between elections. And I hope that leads to, ultimately, I hope that leads to greater turnout than we've seen in these last two.
Yeah, good last thing before we bring others in, Matt, is that turnout, right? Low turnout in
Yeah.
both cities. Where do you think the political parties played into that, or how did it play into that?
I think likely differently in Edmonton than Calgary. I think Mayor Knack's campaign against the system. I think helped create the impression that political parties just don't belong in municipal politics. I'm not suggesting that he sort of contributed to cynicism, but I think he captured a sense of cynicism that was prevailing in Edmonton in a bigger way, perhaps than in Calgary. The turnout is an issue, though, and I think there's a few factors here that contributed. Hard to overlook the fact that with the teacher strike happening right now, a lot of voters, I'm sure, had some challenges. Just getting to the polls. Folks don't have. I mean, kids are at home, and that makes it a little difficult. And it's also, of course, the first election that was done under this new hand counting the ballots, requiring a voter affirmation form. And I can tell you that, at least anecdotally, amongst people I'm talking to here in Edmonton, the reports, even just the reports of long waits at polling stations, was a real disincentive for people to go get in line and cast a ballot. So I imagine parties played a role in turnout, but on the flip side, you could probably make an argument that in specific races, they increased turnout. They would have had a much stronger GOTV sort of apparatus to get people out to the vote.
Okay, thank you for all that insight, Matt. Rachel, I want to bring you in here because you have very recent experience as a town councillor in Okotoks. So in both Calgary and Edmonton, growth and housing were big issues throughout the election. Alberta is Canada's fastest growing province. Calgary alone, we're adding 250 people every single day and racing to a population of 2 million. Okotoks, right? Kind of on the border, bedroom community. How did the issue of growth affect elections in the growing communities around Calgary and Edmonton, in your opinion?
I think growth was definitely became a ballot box question for some communities. And if it wasn't the issue, how to tackle growth was a part of many campaigns across kind of the region. So it was different than in 2021. Like there was some undercurrents of growth in those campaigns, but in 2025, all the campaigns that I saw, they had growth somewhere in there. And in some communities, it became kind of the question. And I think the other way that it changed or was different in this election is that the past 4 years saw huge growth in Alberta. And so incumbents that experienced that growth, they had to spend a considerable amount of time and energy explaining how that growth was impacting their communities, what they were trying to do about that growth. And the new folks that were running, what they were able to campaign on is that they either wanted to see the growth stopped, changed, slow down, regardless if their ideas were actually feasible or not. So that was a different dynamic that didn't necessarily exist in the 2021 election.
Sure, yeah, thank you for that. Can you talk to us? I mean, Nonprofits Vote is not just Edmonton and Calgary, we're Alberta-wide. Talk to us about what happened in Cochrane and in Foothills County, and what you think these races kind of mean for the future of bedroom communities who are dealing with the same issues that the big cities are.
Sure, yeah, and I think Cochrane and Foothills County, they're good examples of how growth kind of was a factor in the election. So the county saw 3 incumbents replaced with 3 candidates who ran together, who wanted growth slowed down. They wanted the type of development to change. And then Cochrane saw an incumbent mayor replaced with a candidate who had a large focus in his campaign on, slowing down, changing the look of that growth. And if it's okay, I'd like to add the Okotoks perspective as well.
Sure.
So the incumbent mayor was reelected here in Okotoks, but the 2 competitors that ran against her, they both ran on campaigns of stopping or slowing growth, and they received more votes than the incumbent mayor. So I think what this is showing, this election cycle really showed how growth is a very real concern for residents across Alberta, especially in kind of the fast growing regions in the suburban communities and also in the counties. Like we saw Foothills County, even Rocky View County had some changes as well. And I think that there is a shift occurring in Alberta where small communities that are folks are used to kind of the feel, the way that they look, those are changing due to that provincial growth. And then, so I think future municipal councils really have their work cut out for them because they're going to have to figure out how to accommodate that provincial growth while really recognizing the real concerns that residents have and trying to keep community identities and the sense of place that residents have in these, smaller bedroom communities.
Sure. And as a former counselor yourself, how easy or how difficult is it to deal with these issues?
Yeah, it was a large challenge. And I know, again, across the board in these regions, but also in Edmonton and Calgary, this was a campaign issue and it was really challenging. And the main reason it was challenging is because the mass movement of people in Alberta was outside of municipalities' control. They just started coming in and municipalities were at the front line of that growth, right? So folks were moving to Alberta, whether or not there was the infrastructure there to support them, either housing, roads, recreation. And so municipalities can really only move so fast to accommodate that growth, right? We only have certain budgets to work with. There's only certain policy levers that we can use to accommodate that growth. And sometimes it just isn't fast enough. And then I think the other thing that was really challenging, at least from my experience as a counselor, and I know other counselors have experienced this as well, is that folks don't necessarily want to see their communities change, right? And we recognize that, and I get that. And they're holding on to what their communities were like. But stopping growth altogether, it's not an option, right? And so I think that what was and what continued to be so important is the process of reconciling residents' concerns and real fears with the growth and the realities of what is happening in Alberta. So municipal councils definitely in the future, that is something that they are going to have to tackle. And it's what we tried to tackle in this last term. And it will continue, I think, to an even greater extent coming up.
Yeah, absolutely. Will certainly be an interesting 4 years for the next councils across the province. Jack, let's bring you in. You've done a lot of in-depth research on voter perception of candidates this election, as well as last election. And then extra interesting in the race in Calgary was that there was 3 front runners who also ran in 2021, which you have data from. So tell us about your research. How did the perception of Jody Gondek, of Jeremy Farkas, and of Jeff Davison change over the last 4 years and kind of play into what we saw happen on Monday night?
Yeah, so one of the questions that we've been asking in the surveys that we run each cycle in Calgary is to have people place the major mayoral candidates on the ideological spectrum. So imagine a spectrum from 0 to 10, where 0 is the farthest left and 10 is the farthest right. And we have people report their perception of where each of the mayoral candidates sits on that spectrum. And this gives us a pretty good picture of the average perception among Calgarians of each of the major candidates. And the interesting thing is how dramatically between 2021 and this most recent election in 2025, those perceptions shifted for some of the major mayoral candidates in Calgary. So Gondek in 2021 ran quite fiercely against the idea of that municipal politics is about ideology. I think she called herself a radical centrist. Calgarians put her at about a 4 on that left-right spectrum, so a little left of center, but certainly in the moderate terrain. This time around, on average, Calgarians put Gondek at 2.8. So just a huge shift leftward in perceptions. In 2021, Farkas ran on a quite conservative platform, and Calgarians recognized him as a quite conservative candidate. They put him way out on the right at about 7.5 on the 0 to 10 scale. By now, I think basically everyone in Western Canada is familiar with the story of Jeremy Farkas's path to moderation and reflection, and that's something that Calgarians noticed too. So this time around, he was at, I think, about 5.4, 5.5, just right of center, almost where Gondek was last time, but on the right side of center rather than the left side of center, in that moderate terrain. And Calgarians even noticed how Jeff Davison had shifted a bit rightward in this election relative to the last election. So typically in Canada, people's perceptions of politicians' ideological placement, it doesn't shift around all that much. They tend to be fairly stable. And so it's quite remarkable to see in Calgary just how much these perceptions shifted, not just for one candidate, but for many of the major candidates. And it really changed the dynamic of the race and the coalitions of support that each of the candidates had.
Yeah, it's fascinating, the research that you're doing, Jack. Can you speak up about what it says? Like if Farkas could have won without the movement that he had, and I think what does your research teach people who want to run for mayor in 2029? You know, I've heard jokes since election night of, oh, Sonia Sharp has to go on a big canoe trip and a soul searching mission and come back and reframe herself. And I know there's jokes, but I think it's like a fascinating case study in what it says for someone who's like wants to do this in 4 years.
Yeah, somehow Canadian politics just never changes. There's always a walk in the woods involved in every political career. So I think one of the oldest, most foundational theories of voting in political science is called spatial voting theory. And this is the idea that voters look around for a candidate whose policies and promises are most ideologically proximate to themselves, closest to their own ideological position, and they select that candidate. They support that candidate. And the thing is that most of us don't live at the ideological extremes. Most of us are basically ideologically moderate. In Calgary, for example, 40% of Calgarians put themselves at a 4, 5, or 6 on that spectrum, either right at the center or very close to center. So that's where the bulk of the votes are. And so I would say, you know, it absolutely helped Jeremy Farkas to move toward the center, to have access to that enormous bulk of votes near the center of the ideological spectrum. It would have been much more difficult to win if he had remained in Calgarians' perceptions way out at 7 or 8 on that same ideological spectrum. It's not impossible to win from those positions. There are different dynamics in different elections, and certainly if people are upset enough at the incumbent, they are sometimes willing to support a candidate, a challenger, even a fairly radical one, if they think that's the most viable replacement. But most of the time, I think there is some purchase to this old traditional spatial voting idea that having access to where the voters actually are in their policy preferences and their ideological self-perceptions is an advantage for somebody who's trying to win office. There can be other motivations, I should say, for running for office, to change the policy discussion, to introduce ideas into the a policy agenda and so on. But for someone who's trying to win, you know, you have to build a coalition of voters, and having access to a larger coalition rather than a smaller one is a good thing.
Sure. And just lastly, Jack, we've heard a lot of chatter about this global anti-incumbent movement. How do you think that played out in the Calgary and Edmonton races?
Yeah, I think that the story of the incumbent success and incumbent failure in the municipal elections in Alberta, you can think about this in terms of different layers. And one layer that's important is this global dissatisfaction with political incumbents. We're seeing major turnover in the UK, in the US, in Europe. You think about the what has happened in federal politics in Canada. There's a real hunger for change, and I think you see evidence of that in the Alberta elections as well. There's another more local layer that Rachel was talking about with the challenges of growth and some of the dissatisfaction that emerges out of like more specific policy issues that are happening in Alberta, really across really big municipalities as well as medium-sized municipalities and even some quite small ones. And then there are the very specific kind of hyper local dimensions of the who chose to run in a specific race, how that created the kind of coordination problems that sometimes happen in municipal elections, where even in our new party system, a lot of candidates are running as independents, and so you can have kind of crowding in certain spaces that complicate life for incumbents. Certainly, a lot of incumbents won, especially in Edmonton. But this was not the standard story of 90% success rates for incumbents and incumbent dominance in municipal politics. And I think thinking about it in terms of that global as well as provincial layers is helpful for understanding where that change is coming from.
Sure. Thank you, Jack. Just a reminder to those watching, you can put questions in the chat and we will get to them shortly. Jason, we'll bring you in. You have covered City Hall in Calgary. I don't want to age you too much, but dating back almost 2 decades, maybe. You keep an eye on City Hall. You have for many, many years. What stands out to you most about this year, about the municipal races in Calgary and Edmonton?
Edmonton's was really interesting in terms of the sorry, you guys getting background noise? Noisy in the back? Okay.
You're good.
The Edmonton race struck me that the resounding, you know, in the past over the election, there was a real resentment for incumbents in both ridings. It seemed like people were really unhappy with their council. Certainly that was the narrative. In Edmonton, the insurgent Better Edmonton Party was soundly rejected. I think a lot of that had to do with animosity and frustration toward party, especially that it was a bunch of independents running against a bunch of, you know, there was no status quo party, but those who were defending against a Better Edmonton, leveraging the idea that they'd been heavily funded by corporations and construction companies, and just played into that animosity as well. I don't know if that's necessarily a vote for the status quo, but certainly a vote against the alternative that was emerging from that. In Calgary, where I have more knowledge, and I should share more. One of the most striking things about this race is how few votes Jeremy Farkas got to win. That he will not have a resounding mandate. He gets the office, he gets the chain, he gets the bully pulpit, and it'll be very interesting to see how he uses it. But his mandate is slight. Not only did he get fewer votes than he got in losing because of how low the turnout fell in Edmonton, he got less of a percentage of Alberta's votes, or Calgarians' votes. He got nearly 30% in the last election. This election, he got 26% of the vote, nearly just 1/4 of Calgarians who voted, of the few number who voted for him. That is going to potentially clip his wings a fair bit, especially against some incumbents and some other people who won much larger pluralities, if not majorities, in their own ward races. I'll give you some perspective about how tight this was. We've had very tight multi-party races, multi-candidate races before in Calgary elections. 2001, when Dave Roncagnier won in an open race, he won with 28.3% of the vote, which was shockingly small, but not quite as small as Al Duerr before him. In 1989, when he became mayor, he won with 27.9% in a very tight multi-part candidate race. 26% is very slim, especially when you're talking about somebody who won by just 583 votes over his rival, Sonia Sharp. There will be this recount, could be the largest recount in Canadian electoral history, having to recount 48,000 or so votes. But it'd be surprising to see so many votes flip all in the right direction to make her win. So it'll be very curious to see how much Jeremy Farkas thinks he has a mandate to exact his will, especially given how small the limited the mayor's voting power is. He only has one vote against a series of other entrenched interests, and some party, some not, in the rest of his 15-member council.
Yeah, to your point, only one vote, right? How can you talk to me, Jason, about the rest of the council makeup? You've written that it will be a patchwork of members from various political parties, independents, and there's only 4 incumbents. There hasn't been this much turnover in Calgary since 1915. Do you think the turnover, especially on the heels of a deeply unpopular council, is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Talk to me about what you think those other 14 votes look like.
It's going to be really interesting, and the party aspect of it'll be fascinating to see how it plays out. You could in a very reductionist way, you could look at this council as, I think it's five progressive types, including DJ Kelly in Ward 4, who ran for the Calgary Party and won. There could be another one, Sarah Ferguson. There's a 29 vote split in Ward 12 in the southeast suburbs against the A Better Calgary, kind of the furthest most conservative candidate. That could flip. That could be really big on council. Then you have a bunch of guys. It's a very male council, which will provide a whole bunch of interesting dynamics to this council. There are independents in the inner city wards of 7, 8, 9. Who will be quite progressive, and then Andrew Ewell up in the north end in Jody Gondek's old riding, actually old ward, is progressive. You have some 4 members of the Community's First Party, who ran with Sonia Sharp. They will be fairly conservative. Who knows if reliably conservative? And then a few other independents who ran as kind of independent conservatives, including that A Better Calgary candidate in Ward 12 and Ward 6. And then you have a couple of incumbents who are, centrist. They can be swing voters, Raj Dhaliwal and Jennifer Wyness in Ward 2. The thing, though, is that traditionally councils don't have reliably left, reliably right. Because of the lack of a party system, there's no party discipline. There's no expectation that you will vote a certain way. You will be tasked to support your party, to support what your wards want, what you think is the right answer, what is in the best city's interest, which is why unanimous support on council for the arena deal, even despite how controversial it was. When the downtown bike lanes were created, I remember covering this back in the early 2010s. Andre Chabot, who's now one of this community's first and reliably a conservative candidate, has tried to run as a UCPer, was a key swing vote to support bike lanes. Will we see the flexibility of voting? The Smith government thought that parties were a good idea because people will know what they get in that, but candidates in municipal elections have been long enjoyed not being predictable votes, not being able to, either horse trade, to be cynical about it, or just be flexible in their thinking and their reasoning and be open to persuasion, be open to different votes. So it'll be very interesting to see here and among the Better Edmonton candidates in Edmonton, the few people who won in that slate, to see how much of a block they are. And I think that while Dan Williams, the municipal affairs minister, said he will bring parties back, I think let's see how they operate, how those groups function on council. Because if they're just going to be as independent as ever, I'm not sure anybody will see the point except for the technical fundraising and organizational advantages.
Sure. Okay, thanks for the insight, Jason. We've got one final question I'll pose to all panelists, and then we will go to the Q&A. Everyone is submitting some great questions. Matt, I'll bring you back in. Tell me, what is one key takeaway for nonprofits from this municipal election? And we'll pose the same question to each panelist, but we'll start with you, Matt.
Yeah, well, look, I think for all the reasons that Jason has just described, my prediction is that these councils will, by necessity, have to operate pragmatically. And I think that, the depressed turnout leaves a big question mark for everybody in terms of what is your actual mandate. And I think for nonprofits, that's an opportunity. So I would say, get to know who these candidates are and sort of what they ran on generally, but don't be afraid to engage them, to identify champions, and try and create your own sort of micro coalitions on council to support your initiatives, because you're going to see some, well, I mean, strange bedfellows on council. And again, I think that's an opportunity for nonprofits to come in and um, help educate certainly some of the new members. In Calgary, there's an extraordinary number of new councillors, and they're all going to be, seeking information in terms of who are the most impactful and active associations and organizations throughout the city, so that when it comes time to actually fill service gaps, that they understand the role that nonprofits play.
Perfect. Thanks, Matt. Rachel, how about you? What's one key takeaway for nonprofits?
I think I'll go off on the kind of theme that I was chatting about the whole day today and jump off what Matt was saying. So nonprofits, what I would like to do, because these municipalities are all facing the same issue of growth. And what is going to happen in the next 4 years is that these municipalities are going to try to figure out how they can grow in like thoughtful ways, sustainable ways. And these municipalities are going to have, some of them are starting their growth plans, some of them have growth plans. So nonprofits fill those service areas that Matt was talking about. So I want you, all nonprofits, to go into those municipalities, growth plans, forward thinking plans, and find yourselves in those plans, because we cannot, as government, deliver all the things that we want and need in order to grow in a way that everyone is connected. But nonprofits, you can help us with that. And you need to show us how you can do that and provide us the data saying, look, one of your pillars is you want to connect a community as you grow. We can do that through our team this way. And by bringing us into the fold, we can help you achieve your strategic, right? So really, nonprofits, go into those forward thinking plans, whatever municipality you're in, and insert yourself into there and present to council. And I think that you're going to be so integral in the future of our province as we welcome all the new folks to Alberta.
Great points, Rachel, and you come at it from both the nonprofit experience and the politician experience. Jack, how about you? What's the key takeaway for nonprofits?
Well, I think one important thing to keep in mind about municipal policy, especially in a setting where there are a lot of new faces on council, is that municipal policy innovation doesn't have to, and actually often doesn't, begin with the mayor. So I would encourage folks to look around the council table, particularly look at some of the new faces on these councils, and try to find out who are the high energy members of council going to be? Who are the people who are really eager to shape the policy agenda on council rather than just reacting to it? And there's a really long tradition of policy innovation that originates in the work of specific city councilors. I mean, you look in Calgary, for example, community water fluoridation came back on the agenda because of the work of public health advocates and a single city councilor, not the mayor. The arena deal in Calgary happened twice, I guess, initially because of the work of one or two councilors who were eager to move forward on that. The Green Line was Shane Keating's baby, the former councilor in Ward 12, who pushed on that. So this is not to diminish the importance of the mayor, but if you do find a councilor who's willing to champion something as their kind of signature initiative, to learn about it, to push on it, to build a coalition of support on council for it, that can be really powerful, especially in these settings where there's a lot of new faces on council, and there's opportunities for new kinds of voting blocks that, as others have said, might be unexpected. And we're not likely to see these, really clear voting blocks emerge, especially early on in the councils.
Sure. And Jason, what is a key takeaway for nonprofits?
As much as Jack just said, and correctly, that the mayor is not the only way in. For not-for-profits in Calgary, you kind of get lucky one of your own. Jeremy Farkas, in his interim period between losing Walking in the Woods and now becoming mayor, ran the Glenbow Ranch Foundation for a park just northwest of the city. And not only did he raise all that money on his Pacific Crest Trail walk for Big Brothers Big Sisters Calgary, he also joined the board. afterwards as well. So he is, you know, particularly in tuned in a way that others who may have had, you know, some charity experience, some community league or community association experience, wouldn't wouldn't have. So that's one interesting takeaway. The other is that these are the two mayors elected, and probably a lot of councillors are really elected to, or really influenced to keep an eye very firmly on the housing, homelessness, and addiction. Or unhoused, sorry, and addiction files. And these are candidates who won as mayors who did not talk about policing their way out of these situations. So in that space, I think they'll be looking for a lot of solutions and answers, because they're the types that are going to be saying there are no easy answers. So they will look to people who are on the ground with people who need housing, and addiction treatment, and addiction services, to find ideas, find support, find frontline action to support what the city has.
Sure. Okay. Thank you all for the great answers. We have a ton of questions here. We will take as many as we can in the next 20-25 minutes. I think we've got a hard 11:15 stop, but we'll try and squeeze in a lot. I'll kind of direct these at who I think is a good fit, but if any of you want to like really jump in, let me know. The first one is a good one, I think, for everyone. Actually, we'll do another everyone one. The question is, who's in for a bumpy ride on council? Who's destined to be the breakout star? Who are you watching? Rachel, do you want to talk maybe about Okotoks or area, if there's anyone that you're watching, you're excited about, and then we'll kind of go around. People can talk Edmonton, Calgary, wherever they want.
For sure. Yeah, I'll definitely be watching what's happening in Airdrie and in Cochrane. There was a new mayor elected in Airdrie. She ran on a platform of the growth is happening. We're going to do it in a way that supports everybody, versus a different perspectives kind of in Cochrane. Also, growth is happening. Two different perspectives on how they want to tackle that growth, I think. And so I'll be watching those two folks, those two communities, and their approach to, welcoming the residents in the region there.
Perfect. Matt, who are you watching, or who's in for a bumpy ride?
Well, I would say generally, fiscal conservatives are in for a bumpy ride. I think that with the growth pressures that the cities are facing and the campaigns that were run by the winning candidates for both council seats and mayoral chair, there doesn't seem to be an appetite for significant spending restraint. I think you've seen Mayor Knack yesterday, or Mayor-elect Knack yesterday, was talking about looking for efficiencies within city administration, but that he wasn't afraid of looking at tax increases if that meant stabilizing services. So, if there were any of these better Edmonton candidates expecting to come and establish some strong financial oversight or rein in spending, they could be in for a bit of a bumpy ride.
Sure. Jack, what about you? Who's in for a bumpy ride, or who's a breakout star you're watching?
That's a tough one, I think if the outcome had been different by 600 votes and Sonia Sharp had won, I would have said senior administration in Calgary is in for a bumpy ride, but that has proved to not be the case. I'm in addition, I mean, Jason went through the Calgary situation and highlighted a few of the new councillors. Maybe one that I'll add is John Pantazopoulos in Ward 6, somebody with a pretty interesting business background, some pretty high level kind of corporate leadership experience, and also somebody who for a really long time has had a very clear political ambition to get elected and make a difference as an elected official. And so I'm curious to see what he chooses to try to focus on and what his priorities are and how successful he is. I think there's a potential for someone like him on council to bring together folks from right of center, left of center, and maybe get some interesting things done on council in Calgary.
Yeah, great flag. I was just having a similar conversation yesterday. Jason, what about you? Bumpy ride, breakout star?
I'm going to highlight one of the most interesting people to watch on this council will be in Ward 14, the new councillor, Landon Johnston. He had name recognition because he was the face and the petitioner who led the Recall Gondek campaign. As a complete newbie, a fellow who's doesn't have a huge resume. He's an HVAC contractor and runs a small company thing called Igloo. Fairly young guy. Don't even know if he's maybe early 30s or so. Came into that without any idea really what he was doing was some of the people from who are now forming a better Calgary party latched onto him. He rejected that movement. He ran on his own reputation, and he's coming into a council as one of the many newbies, but one of the newbies with the least amount of experience or seeming sense of how to do it, how to operate, what the parameters are. Whereas you actually do have on this council, you have less, yes, a lot of people who are rookies, but who have pretty solid experience. John Pantazopoulos is one. Nathaniel Schmidt in Ward 8 is a criminal defense lawyer. He's the first lawyer on council since 2007. You kind of think about politics as a bit of a baristocracy, that lawyers always run and become premier or prime minister. Not at the municipal fray, which means that he'll be somebody with a unique sense of how bylaws work, because having covered council, a lot of them don't get that sort of nitty gritty, and a lawyer is more likely to.
Well, and a legal aid lawyer too, right? So that we're dealing with a lot of kind of issues downtown Calgary that there's
That's a
certainly
great
some
point.
interesting perspective. Okay, next question here. Let's put this one to Matt in Edmonton. Question is, do you think the 600 vote change from one of the recounts, and maybe just fill people in if they were not reading the news late last night, is an example for why hand counting ballots is a poor decision by the provincial government, or is that par for the course and being blown out of proportion?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So the scenario is in one of the open seats. It was the seat on sort of the west side of Edmonton where Sarah Hamilton was the incumbent, didn't run again. On election night or the day following, I can't even think of what day it is now. I guess that'd be on Tuesday. It appeared that a better Edmonton candidate, last name Friesen, can't recall the first name off the top of my head, appeared to have won that by, I think, 6 votes or something really tight. Shortly after that was posted, there was a statement from Elections Edmonton saying that they'd identified administrative or clerical errors and were recounting it. Upon recounting it, that vote did swing 600 some votes, and it was a candidate by the name of Tu Pamar who has won that. And so there are questions about what has happened here. And did the hand counting of ballots have an effect? Would this have been prevented by tabulators? I would just say, like, let's exercise a little bit of caution on diagnosing this without knowing the facts. Elections are messy, even when you have tabulators. They're often you've got a number of volunteer scrutineers from the campaigns that are in there to oversee. Election staff are generally stood up a month or so maybe before an election. They come in, they work the election, they do the count, and then they go off and do something else. So, like, these are not people that are counting for a living every single day of the year. There's a lot of opportunity for human error. I don't know if hand count was the reason for it. I'm guessing not. Like, I don't think a hand count all of a sudden you lose 600 votes or you gain 600 votes. It sounds like somewhere along in the process, perhaps a bunch of ballots were not where they ought to be and were overlooked. But I would say the one thing that we can all kind of take heart in is this error was caught, right? The system, in a way, it worked. And I think that in my mind gives some comfort and validity to the process. And I would hesitate from speculating further on what may or may not have caused that issue.
Can I jump in here and speculate?
Speculate away, Jason.
I have a pretty good read on what happened. They talked about it not as a counting error, but as a reporting error. While Parmar's vote suddenly rose, he went from 6 votes down to 600 some votes ahead. What also happened was that there was the fifth place candidate, his name I think was Koch, Ronald Koch or something like that, lost 600 votes. So what could very well have happened is that in recording the votes in one of the stations, they put the fifth place guy's votes, or they put the votes for Parmar to Koch. And I know about this can happen, and not only can it happen, but it has happened. I threw to I can't put it in the general chat, but there's a link to a Calgary Herald piece I wrote based on reporting from a former CBCer, Scott Dipple, who found out that in the 2013 Calgary election, the same thing happened. The incumbent councillor likely got 300 and some votes. She got that like in every riding she had, every poll station she had. Suddenly the fifth place guy got 300 votes and she only got 32 votes in that riding, that ward. The problem was in that case, she only caught that likely discrepancy a couple weeks after. So it was too late to do a recount. It wouldn't have technically mattered because Sean Chu beat her by more votes than that gap. But it still speaks to the fact that not only can there be errors in counting and human error, but sometimes human error can be just in the reporting or column writing. And in that case, there likely wasn't a scrutineer on it. When there are tabulation machines, this could happen for a tabulation machine, I suppose. But there would be election officials overseeing that process. So this could happen. No system is flawless. You even look at how some of the after they'd finished counting all the votes on Monday night, in the wee hours of Monday night or Tuesday morning in the mayoral vote, there was still some ticking up of votes by for all the candidates, and that's likely because some people put their mayoral ballot into the council ballot, and when they opened those unsealed ballots, found those. So, yeah, traditionally we vote, we count by hand, but there are flaws with every system.
Sure. Thank you for jumping in there, Jason. Rachel, we'll put this one to you. It is, where did it go? Do panelists think any new councils or mayors in particular will have better luck getting investments from the province? And or what do they need to do to have better relationships with the province? Do you want to weigh in there with your former councillor hat on?
Yes, I'm thinking about that for a moment. There's a lot happening right now, provincially, municipally. I could not tell you at this point if they're going to have better luck or not in the next 4 years. Like at this point, things are kind of moving all over the place provincially. I can't just put my finger on what's going to happen next. I do know that in the last 4 years, there was some movement on some movement on the province supporting municipalities in certain ways, growth related, schools related a little bit. But I can't at this point say if the relationship is going to move forward, if it's going to move back. There's just so much happening. So I'm sorry, I can't give that. I just can't predict right now. The province is kind of like all over the place right now. And I think that's probably fair to say. So I don't know what they're going to focus on with this new term.
Matt, thanks, Rachel.
Yeah.
Matt, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I would say it's going to be entirely dependent on what the ask is. And I think that we've seen that, over the last 4 years as well. If the ask is framed in a way that, from the municipalities, that it's somehow in alignment with the sort of stated intentions of the province, then you're going to have a better shot. My advice on these kinds of things is always push on the doors that are already open. When it comes to some of the major themes that we saw emerge both in Calgary and Edmonton in this campaign around affordability, managing growth, public safety, I think there's a lot of opportunity to find that alignment. and I guess, the other thing to remember, and this is, getting very political, but, the province needs to get reelected before these councils do now. And so take that consideration into mind. Premier's going to want to have a good news story for Calgarians and Edmontonians. And I think, one of the ways to get that is through collaboration with local officials. So, my advice, play the politics, and play it smart. So, and I think you'll find some good outcomes.
Sure. Thanks, Matt. Jack, I'll put this one to you, but Jason, you might want to jump into after. It says, how much do you feel a misunderstanding of municipal politics scope has aided in folks blaming municipal politicians for larger scope issues, like provincial and national issues? Does this contribute to the dissatisfaction with incumbents and the strong animosity in politics?
Yeah, this is a great question. It's certainly, I mean, over the last a couple of months, I've spent a bunch of time tagging along with candidates all over the city while they were knocking on doors. And it's certainly the case that once the teachers' strike began, and municipal candidates were asking folks, what's on your mind? People say, what's on my mind? The teachers' strike is on my mind. And so there's no question that if people are really dissatisfied with government at one level, that can have spillover effects on how they think about incumbents and their voting decisions at another level. But it's not just a matter of if you're mad at the province, it's bad for municipal incumbents too. And this is because the survey research we've done shows that people are actually better than you might think at do a better job than you might think at understanding who does what. That they do have a maybe not a super technical, detailed understanding of these things, but they certainly understand that there are aspects of what's going on in their community that are out of the control of the municipal government and things like that. And the other thing, of course, is that municipal candidates sometimes run against the provincial government. And so dissatisfaction with the province can manifest in support for candidates at the local level. If you say you need to elect me or re-elect me because I can be a strong voice for this community against the province. That was the big story of the last mayoral election in 2021 in Calgary, for example. So just as is the case in provincial politics, where we see parties running against the federal government as part of their strategy, that happens municipally as well. So it's the level of understanding varies in part as a function of how much the intergovernmental conflict is part of the campaign itself, and how much municipal candidates are really talking about this as part of their own campaigns.
Perfect. I've got one more. I think I'm just looking at the time. We'll do one more here. Jason, why don't we start with you on this one, and then if anyone else wants to jump in. It says, in your view, did provincial parties have an observable influence on municipal election outcomes compared to newly formed local or independent groups? And then there's a bit of an example. In our rural area, for example, we noticed what appeared to be a background influence. 3 of the 4 elected officials are UCP board members. Interestingly, the mayoral candidate had minimal community engagement or social media presence during the campaign, yet saw a 68% increase in votes compared to his previous run 4 years ago. We also noticed parallels in messaging between our local candidates and those described by Rachel and Adrian Cochrane, focusing on getting things back to how things were years ago.
I'd be curious to know which municipality that was. People can get a hold of me.
Story there.
Just curious. I mean, where there were parties, people formed parties, and there had been, there have to some extent been, people with circles of influence or spheres of influence from certain groups. There's a lot made publicly of the idea that this group, the Calgary's Future, funded a lot of these candidates or advertised heavily for a lot of progressive leaning candidates in the last Calgary election. This is a group that's run by unions mostly, and that really created these people as a party. But that, knowing what I know about that group, that's overstated. So there'll be all various influence groups trying to do different things. If people run as a block, that can happen. But I think the out and out attitude towards parties seemed mostly negative, to the point where you even heard the party candidates for mayor here, Brian Thiessen and Sonia Sharp, both saying, "I don't like parties really." And the candidates who were elected, Calgary, uh, for the Community's First Party, Dan McLean and Rob Ward in Ward 11, and include also Terry Wong, the Community's First candidate for Ward 7, who lost his seat. They did not have the term Community's First on their sign. So they were using the advantages of party fundraising and central organization without the ability without having the identification on their own map. They were running on their own credit. Rob Ward ran on the fact not that he was a part of a party, although he'd do some photo ops and some announcements with Sonia Sharp, but on the fact that he had run before and almost won. And people remembered that, and they pushed him over the top. Same with Kim Tyers, who had run before in a different ward, and that helped her push her over the top. It'll be very curious to know how cohesive there's party organization behind these people in the future between elections. As I think it was Matt talked about them being kind of MacGyver together with baling wire and chewing gum. Will those people stay on as volunteers or as barely paid staff to fund any operation without entrenched organizations like there are in, say, Vancouver, Montreal? It's quite possible the answer will be no.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting too, even in the debates, both Brian Thiessen and Sonia Sharp didn't even call them parties, they called them groups. They're like the community's first group, the group I am with. It's
Which
almost
made it hard when it was called the
party.
Calgary Party. Oh, and since this is political gossip with friends, we called it that. I don't really think of any of what it was gossip, but something that's behind the scenes that's interesting in this is that there was a connective tissue between the Calgary Party, the progressive group in Calgary, and A Better Edmonton, the more conservative-leaning big business group in Edmonton, and that is Stephen Carter, the same strategist who had propelled Nenshi and Gondek to victories in the past, as well as other candidates like Alison Redford, was the key strategist behind both parties, even despite their being in different cities. He jokes that he was running like 26 election campaigns, and I guess maybe he only won like, what, 4 of them?
4. The answer is 4. There will be an accountability episode on his podcast at some point. Jack, jump in there. You have your hand up.
Yeah, I was just gonna say something about the parties behind the scenes. I guess the one thing that I've been thinking about is that there's a sort of ironic sense in which the presence of the parties in Calgary and Edmonton perhaps dampened the explicit influence of parties and partisanship in these elections. Like, think back to 2017. Some people will remember when Jeremy Farkas was running for council with a sign that was the exact deep blue color of the Federal Conservative Party. And as if that wasn't clear enough, it said along the bottom, "Your conservative choice." Like, that's a partisan cue, and now we have these signs that say a better Edmonton, Calgary Party. That kind of cue is much less clear. But I often tell my students in city politics class that people don't switch off the partisan parts of their brains when they vote in municipal elections or participate in municipal elections in any way. And the people who are driving around on a Saturday morning putting signs in people's lawns from their truck, those volunteers, I mean, some of them just love municipal politics, but a lot of them just love politics. And so the networks of volunteers behind the scenes, the way that, Rachel probably has had this experience when you're knocking on doors, someone opens the door and says, "Well, what are you? A conservative, a liberal, an NDP?" All of those ways that people think about politics in partisan terms and partisan language, they influence municipal politics, whether there are formal political parties or not. And so I think that these kinds of behind the scenes relationships and networks and voting decisions will continue in across Alberta municipalities, whether they have formal political parties in the legislation or not.
Yeah, and I would just say, like, this is an interesting point because, while there were parties that were established in this campaign, there was obvious reservation on, jumping with both feet into this and saying, I'm a partisan, and sort of attaching yourself to the conservative moniker, the progressive moniker. And I find that interesting because in an election like here in Edmonton, with 30% of the vote, there were a ton of conservatives that either didn't vote for the presumed conservative candidate, and you have to do some research to understand that Better Edmonton, by and large, represented right of center parties. It's not obvious by the name. But when you look at in a federal election, Edmonton reliably elects a lot of conservatives. Maybe not as many as Calgary, but a lot of them. And so I think, just an interesting thought exercise is, how would Tim Cartmel have performed if he had come out and said, maybe not UCP, but I am the conservative candidate. That's what my party represents. Would he have performed better? Would there have been more people who say, "Oh, he's a conservative. I didn't realize that. Well, I will come out and vote." And I think that when you look in rural, where you don't have the party system, and the only sort of identifier, unless you have a public that is willing to go to candidate websites, show up at forums, and really understand candidates, the only way you can really explain yourself in a short little quip is by saying, I'm a conservative, I'm a liberal, I'm a what have you. And so I think that probably had much greater impact in rural than in the two urban centers, because it's just easier to look up information on a candidate in Calgary than it would be in small town Alberta. Just the media landscape's different. There's more forums, there's more events, people are on the record more often. So next time around in the two major centers, will we see someone come out and say, we're the conservative party? I'd argue that perhaps maybe you would have a better result.
Good observation and good question. We have 7 minutes. We'll do a quick lightning round, final thoughts. Kind of give me 30 seconds, final thoughts of the election that was. Jason, we'll start with you.
One of my favorite facts. So there was one of my favorite facts about Calgary is as reliably conservative as Calgary votes federally, and with some exceptions, very recent exceptions, provincially, they have not chosen a conservative mayor. One of the candidates, a guy who's going to run, said, "We haven't had a conservative mayor since Ralph Klein." Not true.
Yeah.
Ralph Klein was not a conservative mayor. He was actually very liberal. He was pro debt, pro building, against selling en masse, for justified taxes. It was Ralph Klein not only before he was premier, but before he was conservative. And one of the overarching theories of why that is, and why that Jeremy Farkas could only win by not running as a conservative, is that it goes back to what, and I think she's on this call, pollster Janet Brown talks about Calgarians aren't physically conservative, they're tax averse. They don't want to pay for things, but they do want stuff. There was somebody in the 2010 campaign who asked, does Calgary want a great city or a cheap city? And that was when Rick McIver, the conservative, was running against Diane Nenshi, a more centrist progressive type. And people wanted the person who was optimistic, sunny about building, expanding, investing. When people think about what they want in their city, they think about that. Eventually, there's going to be a time when Calgary is so fed up with whatever the flavor of the month is that they're going to say, yeah, we want a cheap, bare bones, back to basics city. But time and time again, that has not happened. And that is one of the most fascinating things about this city's political fray.
Thanks, Jason. Rachel, what are your final thoughts?
Yeah, I think that a huge difference I saw from 2021 when I ran to this campaign is that, lots of the campaigning is done at the doors, but there's so much that happens online, and social media is a really powerful tool in campaigns, as we know that. But I do also, I believe that I saw in this campaign kind of the worst parts of social media across different communities in terms of spreading misinformation. And it honestly was heartbreaking to see. And so I think that just the one key takeaway is that, like, folks continue please to talk to each other in person, right? Because I really saw things happening that, that were not contributing to the political dialogue. It was not helping local democracy. And if we want good candidates to run in the future, we need to show the example of, if you get into the office, this is how you're going to be treated. And so folks, talk to each other, please, in person, but also online, in a way that people are watching you. And we want good people to run in the future. So I'll leave it at that.
Great points, Rachel. Jack, what are your final thoughts?
I'm going to use my final thoughts for shameless self-promotion. We have been collecting data in Calgary over the last few weeks, and we're now in the field collecting survey data in a number of municipalities, the big cities and medium-sized cities across the province. And it includes a lot of questions about policy attitudes, including some local issues in these municipalities across the province. So if anyone on this call has an interest in what those results look like, if you want to know more about the data and find out if we have something that could be of use to you, please do get in touch. This is part of the purpose of why we're doing this with this this Canadian Municipal Barometer project. So send me an email, and if we have something that we think that would be useful for you, we're always happy to share.
Perfect. Thank you, Jack. And Matt, your final thoughts?
Yeah, I guess my final thoughts are buckle up, because the hard work is about to begin. And, while it's been clear that blanket rezoning is likely not to continue, what's not clear is how are they going to come up with something better, something that has buy-in from community members by and large, knowing that, 35% of people came out to vote. Yet the perception was that people were overwhelmingly motivated or angry on one side of the issue or another, just on that one file. Add to that tremendous growth pressures. The province has hinted that the budget's going to be tight, so don't expect big increases to municipal grants. And it just means that, again, a pragmatic approach is going to be absolutely necessary, not just to get things done, but I think for councils in both Edmonton and Calgary to survive. Like they have a mandate functionally. They will sit down and, deliberate on budgets, but practically, the public is likely in for quite a few surprises, because these major issues, they may have been talked about, but I don't know if a lot of solutions were necessarily landing, when voters were absorbing this information. So, buckle up.
Buckle up. That is a great note to end it on. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this morning. And remember to sign up and spread the word about nonprofits. Vote. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.